Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nicholis.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Well, we're very excited today for our very special guest. He has a lot of stories. In fact, I have a feeling we're going to get more than one episode out of this gentleman.
I hope.
He is... He's Chris Butler.
Hey.
And hi, Chris.
Hi. Hi, Bob. Hi, Nick.
Hey, guys.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Many of you out there probably know who Chris is, but if you don't, he's one of the most interesting musicians from the Northeast Ohio area. His work has been really recognized worldwide, actually, and he's done all kinds of amazing things. He's one of the most productive and prodigious creative people that I've ever known.
And he's still going, man, million miles an hour.
Going strong. And so we've been wanting to have Chris on the show from the very beginning for a lot of reasons, not only to recount a lot of the aspects of his life and career, but also because, frankly, even though I've known you for decades, there's a lot of stuff I don't really know about you. And so I thought we'd delve into the mystery that is Chris Butler.
Well, oh, yes. Oh, yeah. The mystery. I am an open book. Ready to go.
This is your life.
This is your life.
You know what?
No, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. It's terrible.
You know, I've known Chris for 40 plus years, and through the music world, not only was he a friend, and I got to enjoy him, watching him play in various bands.
Thank you.
But he was also on my record label, Clone Records.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have a 45 by the Waitresses, and also two appearances on a couple compilation albums. And hey, man, I Know What Boys Like had a different name when it was on Clone, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was called 10 million trivia points if you can guess the original copyrighted name of I Know What Boys Like. Beat. No, ding! The original copyrighted title is Wait Here, I'll Be Right Back.
Now, who the hell would have thought? There's still a few of those clone albums out there, you pick one up,
Yeah.
And then on Bowling Balls 2, Astronets, which featured, even Bob was on that one, I think, right?
I believe
For
so.
one afternoon, I was in the Waitresses.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. It's Astronets is an instant song. I'd come back to town and Mark Price's basement, I believe.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm in the depths of the basement.
And Augie Teagle from Unit 5.
And Mark Gendersack from Unit 5.
Right. There you go.
And that young kid from the Nelsons on sax.
Yeah. And Laura Ruth.
Yeah.
Right? Who is now part of the Transformer art
really?
building.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, she's married to...
Yeah.
The architect name escapes me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And she also did the artwork for the Waitresses.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
But before I knew who you were, I used to hang out at a neighborhood bar called the Sun Grill, and occasionally I'd go across the street to DeMarini's Lounge. And the only time I ever saw a band there, it was a band called City Lights, and I remember Jack Kidney from the Numbers, later on to be in the Numbers band, was there. But you were a guitar player there.
Yeah, I was the rhythm guitar player.
It had to be 69 or 70.
It was 100% blues. It was Jack wanted to be at his brother's band, 15, 60, 75, Bob Kidney's band. But Bob said, no, you should start your own band and learn the ropes. So I was a rope.
A string, one of the guys.
Yeah, a string. All right, a twine. We were a 100% blues band, really deep album stuff. Sonny Boy Williamson, Jimmy Reed, everything really deep in the albums, because there were a lot of blues compilations out on questionable labels that cobbled together earlier recordings, and Jack was really big on digging way deep. And I played rhythm guitar. I had a red Gibson ES 335 round dot clay dot that I found in a Akron pawn shop, and I played through an old bass amp, custom bass amp. That's all I had, and it was a lot of fun. And then I got fired. And I don't know why. The lead guitar player at the time, and I just, I thought we got along. Apparently, we didn't. And but old friends that I was still in touch with until some of them passed, who in that band, Khan Petracek on bass, Jeff Neese on drums. It was a bit of a rotating crew, but it was a really good little feisty blues band.
Was that one of the first bands you were ever in, or was that the first?
I was in Kent, so I was in college. I had played in bands in high school. I started playing drums in high school, and I played in a high school band called. Went to Orange High.
And where's that?
Now that's in west of Cleveland, a suburb. Oh, okay. And we were at they were called the Disciples, and the Disciples actually had a bit of a history. They were started out as a hot rod instrumental band like Link Ray and the Ventures and all that. And our high school was very, very class conscious. You had wealthy kind of preppy kids, and then you had some scruffs and third generation immigrant kids and some black kids, and each strata of the class structure had their own bands, and the wealthier kids had a band called the Rebel Kind, and they played British Invasion and had really good equipment. And our band, the Disciples, had kind of homemade Olsen speaker amplifiers, and we're very gritty. And we played sock hops, but for the rougher kids. We played car clubs. We played funerals for the bikers, things like that. We were rough and very earthy, and the Rebel Kind were very slick, and they played the hullabaloos and all that. But the Disciples were wonderful for me because we were like the first integrated rock band, high school rock band. So we got to play places that a normal suburban white kid would not. Our lead singer and leader was Chip Fitzgerald, who went on to play guitar and form the Case of E.T. Hooley, and also went out to California. I believe he spent time in Pacific Gas and Electric after Glenn Schwartz left. But we were a really good, rough R&B band, and I got quite an education playing with them. So that was really the first band. And then nothing happened in college. I took my drums down. I couldn't take my drums down, so I started learning to play guitar and bass eventually.
So you were a drummer originally?
Yeah, I was a drummer at the time. Yeah, but I had started on folk guitar. Michael Road, Moda Shore. I'm gesturing, looking at my left hand fingers, moving the fingers on a guitar neck. But I started that, and then I grew up during the British invasion, so I would play Who songs or Rolling Stone songs, and that was the great epiphany, is learning three chords and realize you could play. Oh my God, I could play every song on the first two Rolling Stones records with these three chords. This is like fabulous. But yeah, drums were my really real love, and still are.
So I want to add a little chronology to this whole thing.
Cool. All right.
Okay, because some of these stories I've heard, but I'm trying to put them into a sort of a context. So, and one part of the inspiration for this is that there was a recent social media post that you put out regarding your father.
Yeah.
and about his being like working with horses.
Yes.
This is something I had no idea about. And
Yeah.
so if you don't mind, as much as you care to, I'd like to hear about, I mean, I've always assumed you were from Cleveland.
Yeah.
And now that's official.
Yeah.
So like about your parents and and about your dad, maybe just a little bit.
Okay. My parents. My dad was in the Air, actually Army Air Corps before it even was the Air Force. In fact, I have an old motorcycle, and I am still wearing his A5 flight jacket. That's
Still have your Triumph?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, he was in the Air Force during World War II, and thank God he was such a good pilot that they wouldn't send him on bombing missions. So he became a trainer, and he stayed in the Air Force up until Korea. He met my mom in like 48. She was a pianist and was on the radio at WHK.
Wow, interesting.
Doing a talk show. Short-lived, but But my dad mustered out and or demobbed, I guess the Brits say, at 52. I was born in 49, but I do have vague memories of going Dover Air Force Base in San Antonio and some, whatever the base is, in Seattle, Tacoma. And we lived in, my mother's Hungarian, my father's Italian, two great food cultures. I love to cook, either one. And I remember moving back to my grandfather's house on Ripley Road, and it was a very small house, but it was my mother, father, me, my grandparents, and my great-grandmother, who had come from Hungary and could not speak English. That I remember. I lived there until 57. My father began to build houses, built some in Warrensville, and he built our house, my uncle's house. We moved out into Pepper Pike, Orange, Moreland Hills area in 1957, and I started high school in 59, whatever. And so bang, I got into music from that. My mother was a piano teacher and speech therapist, and my dad built houses, but he loved the ponies. So he would always be hanging around the tracks. He became a trainer. He would buy a horse, race it for a while, and then if it did well, there was some stud fees, and he would take me out of school, and we'd go to the horse auctions in Kentucky. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
We did not get along. Their background musically was big bands and show tunes. The one thing we came together on was I grew up with musicals, the golden age of musicals like Pajama Game and Gigi and West Side Story and all of that. So then along comes the hippies and the British invasion, and I had always been listening to rock and roll radio. I honestly, seriously remember. I swear I remember hearing Mad Daddy Pete Myers being pulled off the air because I was listening, on a little transistor radio, and he said something along the lines of, "Hang loose, Mother Goose, your rags dripping tomato juice." And they pulled the plug, and suddenly it's classical music. And I remember going to my mom saying, "Something's wrong with the radio. It just jumped channels or something." But I was always a rock and roll kind of guy. I'm an old fart, so I got to see things like Elvis, which scared the bleep out of my parents and the generation. Anyway, when I hit adolescence, we grew apart. My dad continued doing what he's doing. My mom continued what they were doing, and I would come home from school, and we didn't have much money, so I would play my 3 or 4 albums over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Do you remember
was-
the first record that you bought?
Absolutely, at John Wade Records on Shaker Square, first 40, which had listing booths, y'all.
Oh yeah,
Right, you go in. First 45 still have it. Bristol Stomp by the Dovell. That's right. Cameo Parkway, Philadelphia label, famous for all bunch of things.
So I'm finding this very fascinating because knowing you, I know that you are a great cook. I know that you have had this interest in military stuff, like with planes and fighters and stuff.
Right.
Which, frankly, knowing you as sort of the post-hippie Chris Butler, I always found interesting that you had that, that fascination.
Right.
And it sounds like both of your parents had very wide interest and were very creative people, and clearly that was
got that gene.
Yeah, it was passed on to you. Yeah.
Well, before hippie, you were greaser. I was a greaser kid.
Uh-huh.
All right. The Disciples were a greaser band. This mod hippie stuff came later. Pot being the great unifier of both these segments, right?
Right, yeah.
In our high school.
Yeah.
World War II had a place at our dinner table every night. And my dad was a pilot, and in the morning, we'd have weather check. What's the weather like today? What kind of clouds are up there?
Right.
Can we fly today? That kind of thing. But it's interesting. I think he flew one time that I remember after that in someone's private plane. He got out in 52 because he didn't like jets.
Oh, no.
Wow,
He
okay.
didn't like. He said they're too damn fast, And he was an open cockpit
Right. Wow.
type
Yeah.
flying guy, and World War II was at the dinner table, and I mean we had a lot of Army surplus stuff and Air Force surplus stuff, so the military was a very big deal, which obviously came to head during the Vietnam War era,
Right,
because if there was ever a schism in the middle of a family, generationally, that was it.
And that went on. That lasted. That phenomenon lasted for a good decade or so.
Yep.
Because that was definitely part of my growing up.
Yep.
Me too.
And I can't. It's funny to hear you talk about the musical differences in your family, because my father as well. My father was a drummer, and he was a big band guy.
Right.
And so for some reason, I was always trying to get him to listen and appreciate to the music I was listening to. Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it always
Because it meant so
failed.
it meant so much. Oh
Totally.
yeah, fail. Well, yeah, I mean, I loved the big band stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
It's just I had
Sure.
this other thing,
Right.
and they
Yeah.
would not buy into it.
No, not at all. And so I would sit there and I'd play records for my dad, and he always hated them, and he always was critical of the drummer. He's like, he can't keep time.
Right.
And my favorite story along these lines is my parents had a party at their house one time. I actually look back at this with incredible embarrassment, but I'll share it with the world now anyway.
Right.
But it was like a people from work. It was like a cocktail party. There were probably 25, 30 people there. And for some reason, they were playing music on the big console stereo. And for some reason, I begged and begged for me to put on, because I thought for some reason that they would like Axis Bold as Love by Jimi Hendrix. And I think the song I was thinking of was Up from the Skies, which is kind of jazzy.
Jazzy, right.
But of course, it is preceded by the first cut, EXP,
Right.
which is nothing but a weird dialogue between a Martian and a radio guy, and then all this like total cacophonous feedback. And I to this day I still remember one of the guys at the party said to my dad, my dad's name was Bob as well, and he said, "Hey Bob, sounds like the computer room make it work. You know?
right.
And I was humiliated.
Yeah,
you know?
well, yeah.
Like, well, listen to this next song. It didn't matter. It was so, well, what was I thinking? You know, but there was that wanting to cross that bridge with them, make some connection.
Absolutely. I have two anecdotes, but wait a minute. What was your experience, Nicholis, about early music and your family?
I wish I could. I was trying to think of something cool to say, but I wish I could have grown up listening to bouzouki music, and the mandolin stuff and all that. But they had no. The only vinyl in my house was what I bought. after the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Beatles,
right?
Then I just started stocking. Well, I did have Timey Kangaroo Down Sport.
Yes, of course, right. But no, or does your chewing gum lose its flavor on
that kind of stuff?
Coast overnight, yeah. But novelty songs.
But no, I wish I would have had that kind of an experience. But no.
I have a side note. I have a good friend in New York who turned me on to world music, George Simpopoulos, and he has a wonderful. He plays Rebetica. He plays Greek blues for the 20s and 30s. It's all about drugs and pimps and all. It's
really?
Highly recommended. Similar experience to you. My Uncle Joe was a kind of a swinging cat, and for Christmas I asked for the Rolling Stones record, Out of Our Heads, and I believe I'm getting this right. It starts with a Chuck Berry cover, Talking About You, which has the most amazing guitar sound on it. And he gave me the record at Christmas at his house, and he took me aside, and could you play me something on it? And I played the first cut, and he said, "Now, very seriously, very very erudite, Lee. Now, what is it about that you like?" And we had a firm discussion, because he's also from his generation, big bands and all that. Mm-hmm. We had a firm discussion. I don't remember the context of it, but that was about the only contact, with an adult, And then, of course, mandatory. Mm-hmm. My mom likes Yesterday by the Beatles.
Yes, everyone. Yeah.
And so that's the 140. That was the gateway drug into that stuff. Was buying the 45 of Yesterday.
So this is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholis, and we're here with Chris Butler, going through his life and times, and it's fascinating stuff. We've kind of touched then about really like the first music that you got into, and how that connected with you, your first record, which I think everyone. Do you remember your first record, Nick?
Yeah, it was Beat the Beatles.
Okay.
I mean, the real record. I bought novelty stuff, just because it was funny.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But let's get into a little bit of who you consider to be your musical influences. I know the answer to some of this, and I think it's a pretty wide palette that you have, but give us a few of the things that really connected with you early on and still kind of inform your aesthetic.
Wow. Oh, God. It's so obvious. But first off, I hate the word influence.
Okay. I take it back.
Influence.
Take it back, man.
I'm inspired by this stuff.
Right.
Well, early influences are, the 99-cent 101 strings, cheapo 99, early progressive percussion records,
Oh, yeah.
With the Adventures in Stereo, with the ping pong balls going back and forth. Look at that, early rock and roll, of course, and then literally, there was a folk music revival in the early '60s, and that was about the time you could go to a clean-cut kind of coffee house. Was it Farragher's Back Room, whatever? So, and if you were 14 or 15, you could go to that. Was it Cleveland Heights? Once again, I probably got the name wrong, but my mom would drop me off, and I'd hear Odetta or something, and that was wicked cool. But my life was ruined by the Who on Shindig. Because you had, the Beatles, and all your parents liked the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones were persona non grata because Andrew Lou Goldham had set up the paradigm of the Beatles are nice, clean cut. Your girls, your daughters will, it's okay to like them.
They'll hold your hand.
They're safe. I'm going to hold your hand. And then the Rolling Stones were set up as the inverse, the dark side. The Rolling Stones want to sleep with your daughter collectively. So, they didn't even count. But in the middle, we had rock and roll TV. We had two shows, Shindig and Hullabaloo. Right. And, I'm watching Shindig, and now from England, The Who. And I believe it was either Can't Explain or, well, they did two numbers. Can't Explain It Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere. And I was floored because visually it was so incredible, and the music was so bizarre, and they were ugly. They were tough. And they had this girl on drums who was absolutely fanatic, and it was incredible because it wasn't "I want to hold your hand" or "I want to sleep with you." It was tough. It was. Remember, we were in the Greaser Tough bands.
Yeah.
All right. I was not yet transitioning into mod hippie. I was still a greaseball. Black jackets, floor chimes, and a belt in the back of my gabardine pants.
No Beatle boots for you.
Why, sure, no Beatle boots for me. And The Who, it's just like, what the heck is this? And they were alive and motion and doing all kinds of, you had this stock kind of thing what somebody does in front of a microphone. And none of them were doing it. Either one guy was standing incredibly still, looking bored as hell. The other were all, animated, and they were dressed weird. They were dressed the same. Beatles, same suits. Rolling Stones, kind of cool, but very, very almost accountant-y. I mean, the Rolling Stones didn't dress very wild until later in their career. They kind of looked like Charlie Watts in his Savile Row suit. They were very, very put a bowler hat on them and they could be working in the city. And The Who was like, hey, what is this? Buttons and Union Jack and whoa, ho, and then this girl, because it looked like a girl with these bangs. And next day in high school, that's all anybody could talk about was, who was that? That was like, whoa. And I went to the record store with my little bit of allowance, and I bought, Can't Explain. And that was my downfall. But that got me all the way through, one chunk, and then going to college.
You were playing drums then.
I was playing drums.
So you probably were blown away by Keith Moon.
I was blown. Yeah. And so I bugged my parents. I got a set of drums and up with the folk guitar. Michael did not row the boat to shore, or if he did, I could care. But and I rigged up this. I bought a big Olsen speaker, and my Uncle Joe gave me some microphones. He worked at Brush Labs in Cleveland, and I would put the microphone on the speaker of my little crappy plastic turntable, and I would play drum, but really blast it through this speaker box that I had made, and or I'd play on the radio, and I just began to play drums, and but then college was the best of all experiences because everything's eclectic, and you have friends who are playing blues, and you would go see the wonderful bands on Water Street in Kent.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would go see Numbers Band or whatever the R&B bands were there. And
you were there early enough to see the James Gang too, weren't you?
Oh yeah. James Band, James Gang and Glass Harp. What is it? It was like $1 admission and $1 for a warm Budweiser.
And the Raspberries.
The Raspberries.
They were all house bands on Friday nights.
They're all house bands at JB's. Kent was unique because you had residencies. Now, most clubs book one band maybe once a month, maybe if they're really hot, maybe,
You get a repeat,
once a month. And or in New York where they just pile them on the bills. But in the Kent was unique because if you drew, you had a slot like a Thursday. Every Thursday it's the. And why that's important from a musical standpoint is you get to develop, you get to grow. And I've said this so many times, what makes Kent Akron unique is there's no opening bands. There's very rarely 3 bands on an evening. You go and on Kent, if I stick with that example, you played 3 one-hour sets a night for 4 nighs a week. You got good,
Yeah.
and the audiences were there. The audiences were there. Whatever genre you were in, maybe you were a country rock band or a blues band. You played things that people would know, maybe covers, but then you began to write. You had a residency. So the bands that would play in the Strip there began to write their own stuff, and the audience was receptive to it. You cannot discount the importance of the Akron area and all of northeastern Ohio. And I'm going to get a plug in because this is something that WAPS, the Summit, is aware of, that there is a receptivity here to new underground or experimental or creative music here. It is certainly really inspirational in terms of feeding the creativity of the area, and it becomes a reciprocal cycle. If WAPS plays it, then somebody might go out and buy the record or see the band, and then the audience builds. And this is a wonderful area for creating things. And Kent, at that era, before all hell broke loose on May 4th, that was the petri dish, whatever metaphor you want, for creative original bands. You had 3 one-hour sets a night. You had a pressure to write and a receptive audience, and you could make some dough. I was in the numbers band. I was playing original music. I was basically earning my living as a musician playing Bob Kidney's original music. That doesn't happen.
No,
that doesn't happen in other places.
I remember some of those late nights, when you'd leave the other bars and you were in Kent and you'd go see the numbers band, at the Cove.
Right.
And I remember some of those nights, like Chrissy, this was before Chrissy Hine went to England. She'd be there in a corner, dancing to her brother's band.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
But, just one real quick thing as far as this fertile world that we had there, we had these kids like you and me that grew up watching Ghoulardi.
Yep.
And the weather was so terrible, you'd be down in the basement, listening to music or learning how to play your instruments.
Yes.
And then luckily when we went to college, these places out there allowed you to, all this stuff that we had, ground up and made us who we were. We could actually go out and play that.
And play it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I remember, too, Bob Christgau mentioned that when he came here, that one of the reasons he thought that the Akron bands were so good, better musicians than some of the New York bands everybody raved about, was lack of practice space. Like in New York, you had to go rent a place to practice once a week or once a month.
Yes.
And here in Akron, you had the basements. Right?
Yes, we had basements or a whole house. You could get a whole. When I moved back here, 2005, I bought a house because Tin Huey was reviving itself, and Tin Huey had revived itself, and we needed a band house. But to finally get back to your original point, going to college and seeing the eclecticism, what's out there on the street, getting to know people who, and having roommates who were into blues or into old-timey country or jazz. I became friends with Terry Hind. And Terry Hind and Terry, both of us lived out in Brady Lake, and I would walk over to his house and I would have jazz listening lessons. He would play me something. He would play Eric Dolphy, or you name it, Bird. This is why. Plus, we had the Kent Record Exchange where you could get cheap, 99-cent, whatever, used, like best of Charlie Bird or whatever. So the education began to expand, largely when I went to Kent for an education. And plus Kent's student booking was really good. They had all kinds of people coming to Kent, whether it's rock but also world music, and so you get really drenched in culture.
Yeah,
big time.
That Kent culture continued. I mean, I think solidly into the 80s and maybe even 90s. I mean, I know that with Unit 5, that we played at JB's every week.
Right, every week.
Yeah, like Friday and Saturday.
Right.
And I think there'd usually be an opening band, but we played, like 2 long sets. And everything you're saying about receptivity to original music, I look back at that now and I think, man, we were really fortunate, because
it's a gift.
Yeah. We'd say like we have a new song. People seemed like they really wanted to hear it.
Yeah, nobody even knew what a tribute band was back then.
Right.
We in Northeast Ohio, you went to hear original music.
Yes. And to absolutely reinforce Nick's point about and Kriska's comment, when we, the collective musical we, who were playing the 3 one-hour sets 4 times a week, went to New York where they want 45 minutes, and if it's 45 minutes and 1 second, the eyes start rolling. So we go there and have to put together a 45-minute set of we killed. There's a reason why Devo, went to Max's and CBGB and became the toast of the town. And you name it, whether it's Bizarros or Tin Huey, the only place we were popular, really popular, was in New York, because we were bloody good. And, the list goes on. Per Ubu, again, that training you did every night, you go to New York, you just, you have your... What happens to musicians or a band if you can stick together with those 3 one-hour sets is you whether you consciously or it just happens, you work out a show. You learn what works and what doesn't work. And whether or not you want to ignore it and go your own way, whatever. But you had an audience that allowed you to go your own way.
Right.
So you become a thing. You become this original thing, and then you transplant it to New York, where you have 45 minutes to kill, and you are now a good musician. Even if it's weirdo music, you're really good at being weird now, or whatever. And you go to New York, and it's like, boom, record contracts, David Bowie coming to your shows, whatever, you're the talk of the town. That is not an accident. There was a formula. There was a pot simmering here in northeastern Ohio that had all the right ingredients.
Right, absolutely. This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholis, and we're talking to Chris Butler. Chris, I have an odd question as we've moved sort of and then a little past the hippie days. But I went to a concert of Indian music a couple of years ago. Yes, tabla, sitar, that kind of stuff, which I love that music. And I met somebody there, and we were talking, and I said, I'm, play drums, et cetera, and it came up that I knew you and that we played, in bands together. And this fellow knew you, and I'm blanking on his name. It doesn't really matter. But he brought up something that I thought was interesting about it, and tell me if I'm correct about this, but did you have I'm curious about this because it's a particular interest of mine. You were interested at one point in sort of like Eastern religions, Buddhism or whatever.
And I know the fellow you're talking about, and I'm blanking on. I believe he played sarod.
He does. Yes.
Yeah, sarod player. Really interesting cat. Yes, there was a. And now we get into the dark stuff. All right. There was a movement in America of all kinds of curious Eastern religions, and you had the Unification Church, and in this case you had Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, a form of Japanese Buddhism. And I had graduated from, I had, after May 4th, I had a really, really bad time. I had PTSD. I had severe clinical depression. I managed to get my butt back to school and graduated, and then I didn't know what to do. And I had some friends from Chicken Falls. They had a house, and they were in this Nichiren Shoshu thing, and I just wanted a room. But I kind of got interested in it, and I have some good, strong friends who one still practices that kind of. But I did that for a while. I didn't have an interest. I had nowhere else to go.
Okay.
My parents, did not want me back.
Right.
I was sick.
Yeah.
And I couldn't afford any kind of treatment. So I went and stayed with these people in Chagrin, and they were very nice. And I tried this, and I did what they did, and it didn't do squat.
Right. Okay.
Basically, it turns out that Nichiren Shoshu is still extant. It was a huge political force in Japan. I don't know. I shouldn't really talk about it because I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But it's still here. Whatever. It was very evangelical in terms of you chant to the scroll and all that.
Yeah.
I was at a point where I would try anything.
Sure, understood.
To get myself out of a funk.
Sure, understood. And the events of May 4th are such a dark rabbit hole, and you've talked about it profoundly over the years. I don't know that we want to go too far down that road in this podcast, only because we could do an entire hour to 2 hours about it. But I did want to mention that later you did create the fantastic album Easy Life. Yeah. I thought if you would, and a lot of people have said what a terrific work that is. Thank you. I was proud to be able to play drums at a performance at Kent State of that. Yeah. But if you just maybe talk about Easy Life a little bit.
First of all, when did that come out? Around what time?
I don't know, 3-4 years ago, maybe. I don't remember, 98, maybe.
Yeah, it was definitely much later. It was, I mean, from the events of May 4th, but it was like that's kind of what gives it its power. I think.
Maybe. Well, just to be hello, Radio Land. I was friends with Jeff Miller, one of the students who was murdered that day. I was with Jeff. I got separated for about 30 seconds. The guard opened fire. I didn't know that Jeff had been killed until the CBS Evening News. That's the Reader's Digest condensed version. But yeah, May 4th had an enormous impact. In my circle, it is our collective trauma and how you deal with it and what you do from it, because it is unhealed and unresolved, and will always be.
Always.
Always be. All the culprits, beat the rap and then conveniently died. So that's it. It's done. But over the years, I had written songs that kind of relate to it, and I either put them on another record or even some of the Waitresses songs have secret allusions to Kent experiences. But I park a couple songs in a little folder and one because I never felt at the time adequate enough to really tell the story because it's still too raw. And I finally said, it's always going to be raw. Let's do something with this. Mm-hmm. And there's an old actor's saying about you don't play King Lear when you're 18.
Right.
You need some gravitas and other life experiences in order to inform the character. So it was time to do this. Anyway, I wrote a narration because I wanted to capture how much fun it was to be at Kent before May 4th. Now, I'm sure everybody who went to college at a certain time, hopefully you have really warm and wonderful experiences. But there really was something special about Kent at the time. We already covered the music area. You were blessed with these bars that had all this incredible stuff. We had a great art department, world-class art department. An English department it was absolutely brilliant. We had Black Mountain poets, Black Mountain teachers. This is a little kind of rum-dum school, This is not a an Ivy League university, but the art department and the English department and the film department. We had a world-known Professor Richard Myers, experimental filmmaker. Yeah. I mean, wow. The amount of culture you got, he would show all the important historical movies once a week. The art department, world class.
Or Saturday nights, you could go see really great stuff there.
Yes, and film festivals and all, and art, music, literature. And, just as an example, the guys in Devo were were mentored in their project by the English department and the art department, specifically the English department, which was Bob Lewis's influence, because Devo started as a manifesto, like all good art movements, whether it's the futurists, the Dadaists, or the situationalists. They all start with, they don't start with a group, they start with a manifesto. So it's Bob Lewis and Casali he came up with a manifesto with, I believe, Bob Dorn being the professor and another guy whose name I'm blanking on, to flesh this out. And that became a band. They found Mark Mothersbaugh, and then they took the concept to the world.
To the moon.
To the moon, just as an example of the influence of the university and what was offered there in terms of how it impacted the creative people who went there or were in the environment. You could drop out of college and still do all this fun stuff, so you can still go to the movies, and, still go to the bars or whatever. Right. So again, how rich Kent was. And interestingly, for my life is also on May 4th was Terry Hind, Chrissy Hind, Jerry Casali, and a bunch of other folks who share the horror, traumatic horror of that experience, and I can't speak for them. It's totally subjective, but I believe that what that experience gave you, and you each had to work it out individually, is you realized you really could not be a part of a culture that tried to murder you. Mm-hmm. And that you would have to find your own way and base a life on self-expression or creativity, and whatever, as loosely as you wanted to define that you had to do something else that was not necessarily mainstream. Now that is a ridiculous generality and very subjective, but I kind of see that in the people that I know who share the experience of that day, to the point where Devo constructed an entire parallel universe, their own world with their own slang, with their own, they were so anti the existing world that they built an alternative world with their own slang and their own look, and
alternate universe.
Yeah, right, a complete alternate universe, an angry, seething contempt for the society,
the reality
that
of what
had
we're
its
living
finger
in.
up. Yeah, yes, yeah, for the society that had its finger on the trigger.
Yeah.
So that's the extreme example, and the rest of us kind of stumbled around but had to find an alternative. And maybe I apologize if I'm making a generality for other people who may be listening, but I think that is a shared.
No, man, that hit so many people so hard. I was actually at a simultaneous rally at Akron U when one of the speakers jumped up on the stage and said, "Hey, some kids got shot at Kent State. We're right there when it happened, but you lived it. You were right there.
Yeah.
That could have been you."
Yeah, yes, it could have been me. And it's not like you think about it every day, but did it have a profound influence? Oh yeah. How could it not? And enough about it, just because you throw up your hands because it's never going to be resolved, and never going to be healed.
Over.
And maybe that's my age group, my generations. For some of us, that's our trauma. But every generation seems to have some huge, horrible thing, whether it's 9/11 or maybe generation whatever they are. Maybe it's going to be COVID. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, there's a whole generation of our kids.
Yep.
This COVID thing. Grandchildren and.
Or
Well,
the Iran hostage. I don't know. Whatever the big trauma is. Anyway, that's our trauma.
The song is called Beggar's Bullets, which is Irish slang, street fighting slang for rocks, usually thrown at occupying British troops. And then the image is all fade away, fade to black, and the world has changed forever.
Well, you're right. I mean, when you're at a certain age, some of this stuff you take it maybe a tiny bit more in stride because you've lived through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a whole generation or two generations now that have grown up in the shadow of 9/11.
Yep.
The world changed then.
Yeah, it did.
And then with COVID, we still don't know the effects of kids that were, missed school for a year or whatever. But anyway, on that profound note, we are at a good stopping point here for episode 1. From Kent State, we're going to move ahead to the years of Tin Huey and the Waitresses, and then beyond, and what you're doing now. So
the Kenmore stuff.
and all of that. So that will be in episode 2. So Chris, thanks a lot, and we will
My pleasure. Thank you for
be back
having me.
for more soon.
All right. Thanks.